Hi, I'm Sydney. I am a, the founder of SOTAG, the Servants of the Almighty God. We are dedicated to truth, love, and the brotherhood of mankind. Today, I want to address something that's kind of foundational to this whole SOTAG thing. It's the realization that that disparity that seems to exist between evolution and religion, it's not real. Let me go back to when this thing all started. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species by the Process of Natural Selection. 10 years later, so this is 1859. In 1869, the great Russian chemist Dmitry Medvedev, he basically said that in a dream, he was tired, he had a dream, and in that dream, he actually saw the chart that had all the elements that make up our periodic table, or I guess the elements that existed. So he said, I got up, I saw it. I got up and I basically wrote it down. And that's the periodic table of elements that we use today. Now, what's the connection between Charles Darwin and Dmitry Medvedev? 1859, the publishing of this seminal work that started this whole thing, and the recognition that, yes, evolution is a process, it's an ongoing process. And 10 years later, there is this synchronicity that we missed. And let me show you where it comes from. What happened is that realization of evolution is science. It's the basis of a lot of our science. The recognition of the periodic table, it's very, very significant that the discoverer of that basically said it. He said, I saw this table and I copied it down, and that's what we use now. The main point in all of this is that everything, all our science, all the elements in the periodic table, we did not create one of them. They existed from let's say, the beginning of time, the beginning of creation, right? All the elements were created. What we found out, and even today, right, we discovered the properties of silicon. We discovered the properties of lithium. So we look in the periodic table and you see from hydrogen all the way up to the highest atomic weights. They were all, as a matter of fact, Medvedev said he was able to, and which we know, we are able to predict the properties of elements just by their position, right? So we know that in the smallest ones you have the hydrogen, helium, and the associated potassium, and we can tell characteristics of them based on just their position. And again, they were all created way before us. So we recognize that. Similarly, right, with evolution, we discovered it. It was already there. In the 1800s, they did not know about DNA. They did not know about stem cells. They didn't know about genes. We are discovering it. Again, discovering that which was already there for who knows how long. And somewhere along the line, this notion of random came in, that this stuff is somehow random. But what science over the last 160, less 200 years, what we are finding out is that there is no random. There are no relics of random anywhere in nature. Everything is, we have this thing of predictable or repeatable. And if it's predictable or it's repeatable, it's not random. And when I say predictable, it does not mean that we can predict exactly what's going to happen. Like, good example, right? The COVID virus. As it was mutating, we couldn't predict what's going to be the exact mutation. But we can predict that any changes were directed, and I'll use a quote of like picking that lock, which is our immune system. So it was directed to getting in, attaching itself and getting through our immune system. That is not random. That's directed. And so it's very likely, according to my theory, right, the existence of any principles, discovered or not, that enables predictive prediction of results or outcomes nullifies any notion of random. So we can predict that if you put this here, it's going to go in this direction, right? We don't know exactly where it's going to end up and how it's going to, but we know that it's going to go and attack this. That is not, then that takes away any sense of random. We are finding out even more when we look at, so we take out this random stuff and you look at nature, we're seeing, like I like to quote, that thing with the coloration of the poison frogs. Why did these poisonous animals suddenly get this coloration that allows other animals to identify? Don't mess with this. Or we have the example of ants and aphids, and we're finding out again, science is revealing these things to us. Right? People go out there, botanists, and they look and they're finding these things, the different branches of science, they go out, and people who are dedicated, just like finding truth, they go out there and they find these things. And now it's established that you have these relationships between celestial bodies like the moon and the activities of animals, that we basically say, oh no, they have this tiny brain, they can, but they're synchronized with the moon. See, no random there, because random would not say, oh, synchronize, and this is not an animal that's living for millions of years. You have, it's almost like they go to school, right? Or the thing with the bees, right? Where bees can find stuff. And I was talking to a friend of mine, he says, I think it's like 2 miles or something like that. They can find stuff and they come back and indicate where it is. How does bees from anywhere in the world know to impart that knowledge to the other bees? So what we're observing is that we have these patterns, and patterns is anathema to random. When you can repeat this pattern, be like, hey, put a bee here. It's like, oh no, this is the behavior. The more we learn, the more we go out there, our scientists who are trying right now to learn the secrets of nature. Everything we're doing with genetic stuff, the most advanced, we are trying to emulate nature. So we are saying, and without the random stuff, you know what that means? It literally means we are trying to understand the rules of creation. That's what it is. We are trying to understand the rules of creation. But because of the random, we say, well, we can't say that. We have to say it's nature. And nature, which is so organized, the food we eat, has the stuff that everything that we need, it's out there, and we can find out that it has certain materials, even things that we thought were poisonous. We're finding out, oh, in small doses, and they have things that we need. So we're seeing this order that occupies everything from outside, from the moon, from the ocean, the depths of the ocean. We're seeing all this things. It's like, we create all these pollutants and we find, oh, this natural thing deals with it, right? If you look at where we are, but our science, how old is it, right? It's a few hundred years old, and we have already had things, and we think that we know everything. The random thing, however, is really messing things up, because then we say it's like we own this. It's all random, and the worst part about random is that loss of what I call our basic moral compass. Our moral compass is passed down to us from our religions. That's where we have the original rule of law, that normally starts with thou shalt not create any gods before me. So regardless of which branch of religion you ascribe to, you have the rule of law. Those laws that apply to everyone and no one is above it. But this concept of that what we did by associating random with evolution get rid of that. Now we are the product of random neural interactions. And so eventually we could all be absolved of moral turpitude and the fact that we don't care about, and we encourage deception and hate and greed and not caring about the planet. Well, that's okay, because once we live, you basically get as much as you can. You do not care, you don't have, there's no obligation to care for anyone else. That's the demonic aspect of just simply associating random with evolution. Because if we take that, which we have to, once we take that random off, it's a magical world. Because now, when you go to some religious organization, they have to recognize what is all of our science. It's a manifestation of his omnipotence, because we recognize we did not create any of this. We are simply discovering that which is already there. And we recognize that even if we don't understand the principles that govern the behaviors, the fact that we can observe patterns says there are rules there. And the classic example, I gave with even recently with the COVID virus, right? It was trying to pick a lock. The lock was our immune system. So it's like it's targeted to this. How can I pick that lock? How can I get in there? And this way you have all these variants. We observing that, right? We don't know how it's going to do it, but we know that's what it's trying to do, because we can observe, and then eventually in broken, we're like, oh yeah, this is a mutation. This mutation made it this and this. So our science, again, it's only a few hundred years old. The rules are already there that says these are directed action. It's like our autonomous driving. We tell the car, go down the road, and we give it some basic information. Now the more advanced is that, no, not only do you have that database and all these methods to go in and say, okay, use this information and make all these decisions based on information you already have, but accumulate new information as well. So as you encounter it, you say, oh, it's not here. I will accumulate it as well, so my decision making gets better. It's like learning, right? That's a machine learning aspect of it. Well, think about it. We are doing this with materials that aren't alive, right? We're looking at elements. So it's with things that more on the side of chemistry. These different elements, silicons and lithium, and then we have the programming and all that stuff, which is and that kind of is my field. I mean, I'm a software engineer, database administrator on multiple platforms and all that stuff. So I understand that logic and how we go through that process. But that's what we do. We build this huge database, and then we allow this thing to add to it so it can make better decisions. That's what the viruses are doing. They have, and that's the part. Again, our science is only a few hundred years old. We may get to that point and be like, oh, so this is what was triggering. But then you see we get into what is life itself, that spark between life and death. And so, the whole question of when did biology becomes chemistry become biology and all of these things, but it may be a way off, and maybe we're not just worthy of that yet, because we still that random stuff that allows us to defy and say there is no God. And somehow we can take credit for that which we discover. It's like I've seen there's a program called Darwin's Animals. So Darwin created these animals, and that sort of thing. We take with our conceit, and we disregard God, which allows us to disregard the commandments, disregard the very basis of our humanity as well, right? So this is something I will be it's kind of foundational, Because once we close that gap, get rid of the random with evolution and recognize that evolution is our AI eons more advanced and not just working on machines, but working somewhere way down at the genetic level where the genes, because you think about, let's say the frog that has to change color or something. Well, the frog, we don't attribute that kind of intelligence to a frog, but somewhere at a genetic level, it happens. You know, animals when they make changes, we don't give them the benefit of having that kind of intelligence, but it's somewhere way down at a genetic level because that's where the mutation gets initiated, somewhere way down at that level, right? It's the same thing with us. You see a big robot. The robot is not doing somewhere down inside that between the firmware, the program running in that memory and the massive database that it interrogates to make decisions. That's where it is. So when you look at a robot, it's like, no, it's somewhere deep inside. Similarly, we see these things have to be happening because the genes themselves have to change, and then you have the mutation and that's where it persists. It persists to the next generation as a mutation, and then they keep the natural selection process. So I will keep pushing this out there, and hopefully, as you see this, you would recognize the fact that we are not creating, we are discovering that which was already created. And eventually, religions would become unified in exalting the Creator, the one who is revealing all these sciences to us. That's the whole purpose and the ultimate goal of this. Get rid of the random and recognize that intelligent design, the source of that. And we are now trying, when we try to emulate nature, to learn those rules of creation. That's the path that we're on, but without consciously attributing the credit where the credit is due, to the omnipotence of our Creator. I want to thank you for taking the time. And again, this is not a coincidence that you ran into this, and hopefully you can now also be a proponent for this information. Thank you for taking the time, and until, God bless.